Welcome back to the Meeple Marathon. Today we are going to be talking about how to play Ark Nova. My hope for this video is to break down the instructions of the game into as simple a form as I can make it to get you going. This is not going to make you an expert at Ark Nova. This may not even help you complete a game of Ark Nova. But just knowing that these basics are going to help you get started with playing, I guarantee you that your first game you're going to have the glossary handy, have the rule book handy, the icon index handy, all of that stuff handy. So your first game is going to be slow. You're going to have to reference a lot. But hopefully this video will help you get going a little bit faster without having to plow through what is a very extensive rule book, very thick, very wordy rule book. So let's go ahead and get started with what is the object of the game. Well, the object of the game is to populate your zoo by adding these polyomino shapes here, which will have to fit specifically onto your map, not overlapping the rocks or the water. And then you fill these enclosures with animals. For example, you see a few out here. You have to have empty enclosures before you can put animals in your park. And then there's other things you can play, like adventure playgrounds, things like that, or the sea turtle tank. And all of this is going to give you basically appeal to your zoo. At the same time, you are trying to work on conservation projects. For example, we have some down here. For example, having 5 Asia icons in your zoo, or having 5 or as many bird icons in your zoo. By doing this, you're going to earn conservation points. And what's interesting about this board here that you see up here that you're going to be keeping score on is that it's a dual track. You'll notice that the numbers here that are in the tickets, the kind of grayish, or not grayish, tannish, khaki path here, they start at 0 here and go all the way around to 113 there. Whereas these spaces here, the green spaces underneath, which you can see the shields, are numbered every so often, not as much as the tickets are. That's your conservation track. It starts at 0 up there and works all the way around to 40, technically 41 right there. The object of the game is to be pretty much be the first person to get their 2 player markers to meet and cross, and then at that point have them cross as far away as possible, creating the largest gap in between the 2. That'll give you a positive score. If your markers don't meet on the track, you're going to have a negative score. So scores are quite low in this game. You could easily win with a score of, say, 8 or 7, or you could win with a score of, say, 20. You could easily come in second with a negative score as well. So now that we understand the kind of objective of the game, let's take a closer look at the different types of cards in the game. Most of them are going to be zoo cards, which are going to have this symbol on the back. This represents 90% of the cards. You're going to have a very large stack of these off to the side. They're going to be all shuffled together, but there's several different types of cards that you'll see in this stack. So let's take a look at those now. So here we have all the various cards that you're going to see in the game. And I'm going to go in some of these in a little bit more detail, but just briefly touch on them now. Your first type of card are your actual player cards, your action cards. These are going to be double-sided. So there's going to be a 2-side, which is kind of purplish, and a 1-side that is blue. Every single person has an exact same set of these, and these are what you're going to be pulling down off of your little track in front of your zoo map, and taking that action, and where it is on the track is going to depend on its power. That's where you can see these X's. Think of algebra. So if it's the 5th card on the track, it has a power of 5. But these are pretty straightforward. Again, we'll talk about these in more detail here in a minute. Then we've got the actual animal cards. I'm going to come back to these here in a second, but you can see that all animal cards have this yellow border or yellow band here behind their name. And these are going to be what you populate your zoo with. An interesting note about the backs of the cards here is that this icon here is not just some nice colors, it's representative of what is in the deck. So this much of the deck, I guess you could say this is easily 60-70% of the deck, are yellow cards, are animal cards. Then this much of the deck is going to be conservation projects, and this much of the deck is going to be sponsor cards, which are blue. Conservation cards are going to have a green banner, and then these are the various types of animals that you can have in the zoo: bird, primate, predator, herbivore, and lizard. So just thought that was neat that this icon on the back is not just some pretty picture, serves a purpose. All right, then we're going to have sponsor cards here. Sponsor cards are ones that are going to probably put unique structures into your zoo. For example, the Adventure Playground, you would find this specific two-piece polyomino that is unique to the game, so there can only be one Adventure Playground in anybody's zoo, and add this to your zoo. You would have to have a strength of 3. Your sponsor card would have to have a strength of 3 to play this, but other than that, you're going to get 4 appeal for playing this, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward. But again, blue background because there's this much sponsor cards in the game. Then you have your conservation cards. Now I have 2 up here for a reason, because there are your starting conservation projects. These are going to have this big green shield on the back. You're going to shuffle these up basically and deal 3 or 4 depending on the player count, and these are always going to be the ones that are out from the start of the game, and everyone will have access to. The rest of these, you can see, have this zoo card back to them. They're going to randomly come out into the display and can be picked up by the players, and then the players will then actually get to choose when these are added to the association board, and when they get to play them, they'll actually get kind of first dibs at placing down their token. So again, these are ways to earn those very hard to come by conservation points. Basically throughout the game, you're going to be earning appeal points left and right. Willy-nilly, you're going to be shooting up the appeal track. But conservation points are much harder to come by, and are definitely ones that come more kind of end game than anything else. So you can see here, this is only worth 2 conservation points, but that's a big deal in this game, again, because they're so hard to come by. So there's 2 types of conservation cards in the game. And then the last ones, which have this symbol on the back, this is the symbol for end game scoring. So anytime you see this symbol, that card is going to give you end game scoring points. Everyone is dealt 2 of these at the beginning of the game, and then at a certain point in the game, they're going to have to decide. So say, for example, these are the 2 I was dealt. Maybe I don't have enough small animals in my zoo to feel like I can do well with this one, but I have a lot of research icons. So I would choose this one, I would discard the other one. This is only scored at the end of the game. Again, end game scoring. Here you can see very quick symbology. End game scoring for science symbols. This is end game scoring for animals in 2 or less size enclosures. And that's it. That's all the different types of cards in the game. Again, the majority of them being these cards here with the yellow, green, and blue background. All right, let's quickly come back to our animal cards here and just cover some symbology here on the animal cards. So we can see here there's some very important stuff to know before you start playing the game. Everything over here on this left side of the card is the payment, what you have to have in your zoo already, or what you have to pay to be able to place that animal. The biggest number here that's in the brown, hexagon, is the size of enclosure that the animal requires. So the New Zealand fur seal requires a size 5 enclosure. The Eurasian lynx requires a size 3 enclosure. Now you could put the Eurasian lynx in a size 4 or 5 enclosure. That's perfectly fine, but you're kind of wasting your enclosure at that point. You're putting it in one that's too big for it. Then there are situations like the Indian rock python here where they can go in a size 2 enclosure, or they can go in the specific reptile enclosure, which we'll talk about how you build that in a little bit, but it looks like this. It's going to be a special tile that has these kind of boxes on them. This python, if put into the lizard enclosure, only takes up one spot. So you would put one token on here, one little cube, and that leaves 4 slots available. Or then there's horses, there's animals like the horse here, which are petting zoo animals. That's what this symbol here means. They can only go into the petting zoo, which is a small 3-part one right here. And you can see it would take up 1 space in the petting zoo. So that's the size enclosure payment that you have to pay. Also, you will note that the New Zealand fur seal has a couple other requirements for its enclosure. It needs this size 5 enclosure to not only be next to water, but also mountains. That's what these 2 symbols here mean. So you have to have positioned your 5 enclosure strategically when doing the build phase in order to be able to put your fur seal into that enclosure. Some other things that you might have to pay, for example, you would already have to have 2 European icons in your zoo in order to play the Eurasian lynx. Now that could come from a partner zoo like this, or it could come from another animal. For example, once you play the Eurasian lynx, that is a European symbol in your zoo. It also counts as a predator symbol. You'll see the fur seal here counts as an Australian symbol and a predator symbol. But it doesn't require any other symbols, but it requires your animal card, which is the action you take to put animals into your zoo. It requires that to be on its level 2 side before you can even play this guy. The Indian rock python basically requires 2 other lizard types or 2 other lizard symbols, but once you play it, it's going to give you a lizard symbol and an Asia symbol. You'll also notice this symbol down here. This is a kind of the only really player interaction in the game, and it can be negative. If you play an animal that, for example, this one is a constriction animal, and you can use that to your benefit to kind of attack other players. Now, if you choose not to, which a lot of people are doing, especially when you're playing for the first time, or you're playing just 2-player, things like that, or if you're playing solo, you have to play this way. Instead of utilizing the kind of take that mechanic in the game, you would just simply instead read the instructions that are in this blue box on the bottom. That's the less take that, less player interaction. You just kind of do things on your own, so on and so forth. So the last things to point out with the animals is obviously there's some text here that you may gain certain things when you play the animal. For example, when you play the fur seal here, you can hire an association worker, and then there's always usually some form of bonus at the bottom. You can see these tickets here are giving you appeal points, or the horse here would give you reputation points, things like that. He gives you 0 here, but he's also giving you 3 for each petting zoo animal icon in your zoo. And remember, as soon as you play this horse, he's giving you 1 petting zoo icon. So if you've already played another one, you would get 6 total appeal for this horse. So that's the animal cards in a nutshell. Again, there is way more text. There's way more symbols than just what you see here. You're going to have to be referencing the glossary and things like that throughout the game, especially if it's your first game. But this at least should get you started. Okay, let's take a look at your action cards now in slightly more detail. Now, I'm going to say this, that we talked about how there is a 1 side and a 2 side for every action card. Just understand that the 2 side is a better card, a better version of everything that you're seeing here. It's going to allow you to say build more than one building at a time, or take more than one association action at a time, or if you're just gaining money using the sponsor card, it's going to double that money. So again, I'm not going to go into the full details of everything that one of these action cards can do for the simplicity of this video, but just so you know that everything has a better side to it, and throughout the game you're going to be given opportunities. For example, you see this symbol here, that gives you the opportunity to flip one of your action cards over to its to side, and it stays that way for the rest of the game. Alright, with that being said, let's just take a look at the one sides here. We've got our player board with our personal zoo map here. These are the association workers that you have heard us talk about here at the moment, and this is the association board. This is a shared board that all of the players are going to have access to. So let's just go through the cards in order. Every game you're going to start with your animals card in the number 1 slot, and then all the rest of the cards are going to be shuffled up and randomly dealt into the 2 through 5 slot. They're all going to be on side 1, but this is roughly what your board may look like to start with. So your animal card. All right, we're just going to start left and go to the right. Your animal card is what you're going to take this action. So in the game, you could say tuck it down like this so you don't lose track of what number it was at, but you know this is what you're doing, so on and so forth. So depending on where it is in line, and let me just say this first, actually this might help make more sense as to the X value of a card. As you play a card, so say you take the build action, you're going to pull this down, all of the cards below it are going to shift to the right, and this one goes into the 1 slot. Alright? If you take the 5 action, this one would come down, and all of these would push over like so. So there is a way essentially to get every card into the 5 slot, but to do so you're going to have to get rid of the card that's currently there. You may not always want to use that card at that time, so those are decisions you are going to have to make. But again, every one of these cards has an opportunity to be in any one of these numbered slots. And you can even increase the number that the card is powering for. For example, if you wanted to take the association action at a value of 5, but you were only at the 4, you could spend an X token, which you will see you're able to gain throughout the game. You would spend this, and an X token would simply increase this number by 1. So all of a sudden this association action, which was a 4, now becomes a 5. And you could even use it to spend it to make a 5 become a 6. Because that X value is everything in this game. So let's start back over here and go through our cards left to right now that I've mixed them all up. So our sponsor card here. Your sponsor card is what you're going to use to play your sponsor action is what you're going to use to play your sponsor cards. Now again, where this is sitting right now, it's sitting in the 1 slot, but say it was here in the 3 slot, I would be able to play my Adventure Playground card. Or if I wait till it gets all the way up to the 5 slot, I can play my Sea Turtle tank. A lot of these sponsor cards come with very unique polyomino shapes, which are unique to the game. There's only 1 per game. And so if you get the Adventure Playground, you're the only one in the game that's going to have the Adventure Playground. But that's pretty much it for the sponsor card. Otherwise, if you don't have a sponsor card to play and you're in desperate need of money, you could simply use the sponsor card to gain an X amount of money depending on where it is. So if it's in the 5 slot, you gain 5 money. Now you'll notice that a lot of these cards have the break X on them. I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit, but just understand that this, when you break X, you're going to be moving the coffee token towards the coffee break. So just keep that in mind. We'll talk about that in more detail here in a minute. Next is the build action. Again, depending on where it is the size of building you can build. So if you have it at the 5 slot, that's the only way you're able to build a size 5 enclosure. If it's at the 3 slot, you can build a 3 enclosure or anything smaller. You could build a 2 enclosure, you could build a 1 enclosure. Note that at the beginning of the game, you can also build a petting zoo. A petting zoo is a 3 size polyomino shape. So to build the petting zoo, it would be 2 per space, so 6. Once you flip this card and make it a level 2 card, that's when you can then build the bird aviary and the reptile house. Again, counting the number of dots on them is the number of spaces for them. But that's pretty much the build action. All right, let's talk about the animal action. So the animal action doesn't matter how far along, how big the animal is. It matters how many animals you can actually put out at a time. So if you wait till it gets all the way up to the 5 slot, you can actually pay and put out 2 animals on a single action. Other than that, you have to get it at least to the 2 slot to play an animal. You'll note that as you flip it over to the 2 side, you can start playing 2 animals more. You're going to be earning reputation points if it's up in the 5 spot. Again, the 2 side is just a better version of the front side. And again, your animal cards are the ones with the yellow banner. So as long as you have the appropriate size enclosure that is open and available, you're going to take your animal action, you're going to pay your cost here, and you're going to just simply place this in your tableau somewhere. And for example, if you had this size 2 enclosure like this, that means it's open and available, and you played the great hornbill, you would simply flip this over. That means that that enclosure is now full. And you don't need to tag it, you don't need to put this card near it or anything like that. You just have filled that enclosure and you put this off on your tableau so you can keep track of these icons there. All right, up next is the association action. And depending on what strength this is, depends on how far along this board you can go with your association worker. So at the beginning of the game, you only have access to 1 worker. So until a coffee break, you can only take this action once. But as you hire more workers, you'll be able to take that action more than once per kind of round. So at a 2 strength, you can see you could place an association worker here and earn 2 reputation points. At a 3 strength, you can put a association worker here and earn yourself a partner zoo. A partner zoo is not only going to give you that specific icon. For example, if you were working towards Asia icons, having an Asia partner zoo is going to give you 1 Asia icon. But it also reduces the cost of any animals you play that match that icon. So for example, the great hornbill here, if I had an Asia partner zoo, like so, you can see this little -3 here. This hornbill would now be 10 money instead of 13. Also, as we noted before, there are some animals who are going to have specific partner zoo requirements in order to play them. If we have a strength of 4 association action, we can take a university. Universities are basically going to give us science icons or the coveted 5 hand limit one. As we talked about here in a second, I'm going to go over the coffee break and what happens during that. But just so you know, when the coffee break does happen, you have to reduce your hand size down to 3. Your hand size is unlimited up until that point, but when a coffee break happens, you have to discard down 3 unless you have partnered with this university, in which case you can keep a hand size of 5. And then the last one here being number 5, if you have a strength of 5 association action, that's when you can actually claim a spot on a conservation card. Obviously you have to meet that criteria, but if you're the first one to reach 5 Asia icons and you've waited that long, you can take the association action, claim that conservation point. No one else can claim this, and you get 5 conservation points. Or you could do it earlier and say, I'm just going to go for 4 and claim 3. But you can see by putting your cube here, no one else can claim that. Someone else could come in and claim the 2, someone else could come in and claim the 5, but no one can claim the 4. Again, these are starters that were placed here at the beginning of the game, but others may be added to the game because they are drawn from the display and then added in by other players, but you could play them as well. All right, but that's basically the association action. There is some other stuff about donations here, But again, I'm not going to get into that because that's all late game stuff. That's not going to help you get started with the game, and I don't want to confuse anybody. Last but not least is the cards action. This is simply how you get more cards into your hand. So depending on the strength, you can see you will get to draw a certain number of cards, and then you may or may not have to discard a certain number of cards. So at a strength of 3, the cards action allows you to draw 2 cards from the deck and discard 1. It doesn't have to be one of the cards you drew. It just means discard a card from your hand. Remember, there's going to be a huge stack. This is only a small handful of those zoo cards. There's going to be a huge stack. This is the deck they're referring to. Unless you have waited until the cards action comes all the way up here to the 5th slot, and then you can snap. I don't know why they call it snapping, but snapping simply means you can take any card from the display that you can see. So anything that's out on the display, if you wait until you get to 5, instead of drawing randomly from the deck, you simply take one card that you can see, and then you refill from the deck. All right? But that, in a nutshell, is your 5 actions that you can take on any given turn. And how good the action is, or what you can do with that action, depends on where it is on this track here, whether it's at a 1 through 5 power. All right, now let's come back up to the main board and talk about reputation and the break. Okay, so let's first talk about reputation. This is actually where your 3rd player tracker is going to start over here on 1 reputation above the first card in the display. As you gain reputation, it's going to move along this track. You can see that the numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller, and many of them have little bonuses that you will gain when you reach, say, 5 reputation. You get to flip a card to its 2 side. When you get up here to 8 reputation, you get to gain an association worker and add it. Actually, you would pull it from down here. So that's reputation. Reputation serves 2 things. One is gaining these little bonuses as you go along, but other times, especially when you flip a card over, let's look at the animal card one, for example. Play animal cards from your hand or from within reputation range. That simply means that you could play, if you have a reputation of 8, you could play a card directly from the display, 1, 2, 3, 4, any one of these 4 cards, because you have this much reputation. Now, it's going to cost you a little bit extra, and I'll leave that up for you to look into, but essentially it's the number of the folder it's on. So if you want to play this one directly from the display, you pay the cost of the animal, which would be up here, plus an additional 4. So that's reputation. Other than that, it doesn't count towards endgame scoring or anything like that. It just kind of helps your current endgame engine. The last thing is the coffee break, and that's representative of this track that's kind of tucked in right here in this brown coffee cup token. You'll notice that anytime you took an action, a lot of times it would say break X. For example, this one says, break 2, or the sponsor card said break X. So if you're gaining 5 money, you're breaking for 5. What that means is you're moving the coffee cup that many spaces closer to the break action. Anytime a person pushes the coffee cup to this space here, first of all, they gain an X token. We talked about how there are ways to gain these X tokens. You would just add it to your player board and you can spend it at a later time. But at this point, the game kind of pauses. And there are certain steps that you can see you would work your way through each time. And once those steps are over, the last one here is to move the coffee cup back to the player count. In this case, I put it at a 2-player count spot. So there's going to be multiple coffee breaks throughout the game. And again, this is going to have certain things happen that are going to kind of clean up the board, clean up the association board, and also reduce your hand size. So the first thing is reduce your hand size down to 3 or 5 if you have partnered with this specific university. So that could be devastating to some people who had certain cards in their hand they were wanting to play, and then a break happens before they're ready and they have to discard some precious card that they were wanting to hold on to. The second thing is you actually have to get rid of any of these tokens that you might have in your possession, whether you have spent them or not. So a ×2 token basically multiplies your card action. Also, the venom and constriction tokens, which were like negative tokens that you may have placed on someone else's board, those are removed. So that's another thing to consider if you are playing with the take that mechanic, that whatever you place on someone will get taken away when a coffee break happens. Next thing is, let's move this out of the way, is that the association board is refreshed. So any player pawns here, association workers, are returned to their notepad, which means they can be used again in the next round. Also, anything that people may have picked up and added to their zoo gets refilled. So if I say take the Asia Partner Zoo in the first round, no one else can take the Asia Partner Zoo until a coffee break happens. At that point, the Asia Partner Zoo will be refilled and someone else can claim it, but then again, it's not available until another coffee break happens. So you refill and clean up the association board. You're going to take the first 2 cards in the display here. They're going to get discarded. Everything else shifts down and you refill from the deck. And then last but not least is you're going to gain income. Now, income comes from various sources, the biggest one being where you are on your appeal track. Say, for example, early on in the game, I have 29 appeal. I'm going to gain 20 money. If I have, 40 appeal, I'm going to gain 23 money. That's the main way. But you can also gain money for kiosks. You may gain money for certain sponsorship cards, or you may gain money as you add to conservation efforts. These symbols here may give you stuff during the income phase. Anytime you see the symbol with the open hand, that is representative of the income phase. But that is the coffee break in a nutshell. So it serves lots of purposes. It serves to clean up the display, or push the display along and refresh the association board and give you income and based on your appeal, and also forces you to reduce your hand size. So the coffee break is very important. And so just note that anytime you see the word break X, you would move the token that number of spaces towards the break, and then whoever lands it on this space simply gains the X token, and then everybody goes through all of the steps. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is this solo board. So this is the only thing you need to play the game solo. This is essentially a timer. So in the solo mode, you are pushed to have your tokens meet to get a score of at least 0 or a positive score. Anything better than a negative, and you win in a certain number of time. I believe it comes out to like 27 turns or something like that you get. And the way you track that is with this board here. So the first thing you're going to do is every time you populate this with a number of cubes that are not your player cubes. So pick a player color that you're not playing with and throw them up on this board. Every time you take an action, you're going to move a cube over. And so you can see that you will get 6 actions in the first round before the break happens. So in a solo game, you actually ignore the term break whatever because you're not moving the coffee cup. You don't actually even need this token in the solo game, or that little coffee cup meeple. As you move all these over, once you move this one over and expose the coffee cup, then you're going to pause and go through all of the break steps, which means you're discarding these tokens, you're discarding your hand size down, you're gaining your income, you're cleaning up the various boards. The last thing you're going to do is you're going to take the top cube off. You can move all the rest back, but this top cube here is going to be added to the far left side of the association board, and you're going to put it on the lowest number you can see, and that just fills that slot. That means you cannot make that donation later in the game. I know I kind of skipped over this earlier, but basically once you have your association card to its level 2 side, you can begin making donations to simply gain a one-off conservation point. The earlier you get to this, the cheaper those donations can be. So you could make a $2 donation very early on and get 1 conservation point. But as people claim these, they're going to get expensive. And so you're going to have to be paying, say, 12 money to get a single conservation point. So all the AI at this point is doing is claiming these, making it more difficult later in the game or more expensive later in the game to make donations. But you'll also notice that as I took 1 off, my next round I only get 5 actions. Once I've taken 5 actions, or maybe this is 6 actions now. Yeah, this is 6 actions now. It was 7 actions the first turn. I now only have 6 actions. At the end of this round, I take 1 away, I cover 1 up, and now I only have 5 actions. Meaning as the game goes along and these cubes start falling away, your rounds between coffee breaks get less and less until at the end of the game you take 2 actions, do a coffee break, and then you have 1 final action at the end of the game. And hopefully at that point you have intersected and crossed your 2 player markers on your appeal and conservation track, and you are successful. You could obviously keep track of how well you do, what's your highest score in the positive, obviously winning at that point. But other than that, it's really just, can you create a zoo with enough appeal to win the game in 27 rounds? That's the solo game. Very similar to Terraforming Mars, where yes, you could keep track of your score, but basically it was, I think, 14 rounds to terraform Mars. If you were successful, you did it. If not, you lost. So just to wrap up here, as a reminder, the object of the game is to move your appeal marker up as much as possible and move your conservation marker up as much as possible. At some point near the end of the game, and usually it's going to be somewhere kind of around this area here, your 2 pieces are going to cross paths. At this point you can see that I have 85 appeal, and that's 10, 11, 12, 13 conservation points. So they are essentially in the same spot. This green one kind of encompasses these 3 tickets there. So at this point I would trigger the end game, and I would finish my turn, and then each player would get 1 more turn to get their markers as close as possible. And then at that point, don't forget, there are these end game scoring conditions. You have at least 1 card that's got end game scoring points, but many sponsor cards and other animal cards might have end game scoring points on them. And so you're going to gain some last minute conservation points that may move your marker, say like that. Then at this point, once you have moved your markers as far as possible, you're going to kind of position your conservation one as to the lowest appeal number that it's in. So in this case, it's at 81, 80, and 79. So I'm going to kind of put it right there beneath the 79. And we can see my appeal, which didn't move during endgame scoring, is at 85. You're going to take the difference between these 2 numbers. So that would be 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's your score. And that very well may be the winning score for the game, a score of 6. It's not unheard of. But that is how you calculate the end of the score at the end of the game. So remember, you may be the first person to have your markers kind of cross paths, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the winner, because somebody may be right behind you and have their markers say here and here, but then they'll have enough endgame scoring points to push way past you and end up with a higher positive score. But that's it. That is Ark Nova in a nutshell. Hopefully this video is going to be helpful for you to get the game to the table and get started. That was the entire purpose of this video. It was not to go over all of the rules or every action that a specific card can give you, but simply to give you the basics, get you started, get you into your first game, knowing that you're going to have your reference sheets handy and it's going to take you a little while to get through your first game, but I promise you it's worth it. This is an excellent engine building style game, similar in the vein to Terraforming Mars, but not a Terraforming Mars killer or replacement in any way, but the theme is spot on. Like, you can't go wrong with a we bought a zoo style theme. So the animal cards are all unique in the game, which is really fun. So you're never going to see the same animal twice, basically, with the amount of cards you have. And every game is different. So yeah, with all of the different conservation cards, end-game scoring cards, and then cards that come out into the display, every single game you play is going to be very different from the one you played last. So this is a game I highly recommend, and hopefully this video will help you get started faster. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more more content like this in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel. At this point, I'm not going to do a solo full playthrough of the game. There's some out there. So it's something that I will certainly consider doing if there's enough interest on the channel. So if you are interested in a full solo playthrough of this game being posted to the channel, please let me know in the comment section below, and I'll consider taking on that challenge. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Have a great day.